Great. So welcome everyone online and in the center, and congratulations to you all for having the bravery to open your center again. That's wonderful news. So this is the second part of a talk on practicing bodhicitta, and we're using a very short instruction by Lord Jigten Sumgon on how to access loving kindness, a major component of bodhicitta, and train in the practice of bodhicitta to go with the wonderful text you're studying, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And so I put in the virtual background Lord Jigten Sumgon, so you have a sense of this extraordinary teacher who, due to his extraordinary compassion and kindness, became such a great meditation master that thousands, over 50,000 people joined him on the plains of Tibet and committed it to go into retreat to actualize their bodhicitta nature. So I'll begin today with a little bit of a review of last week, and then we'll go further. And I want to start with another quote from the first chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Once we have a sense of how rare and how precious bodhicitta is, that becomes for us an incentive to touch base within ourselves to that stream of loving kindness that is our actual nature. So this is verse 5. As when a flash of lightning rends the night, and in its glare shows all the dark black clouds hid, likewise, rarely through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts arrive, brief and transient in the world. So we're beginning an exploration of how rare, how precious, how wondrous bodhicitta is, that awakened nature that is a combination of loving kindness, compassion, and vast boundlessness. And we can look out through history and see there have been people from time to time in the Tibetan tradition, going back to Lord Jigten Sumgon and many, many others. We can see in our lived experience, recent history of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. So we can certainly see there are great heart minds to admire. And it's difficult for us to take in that we are of the same capacity, that it is our potential to have that same vastness, that same altruism, that same strength, that we can put the welfare of nations in front of our own welfare or beyond our own welfare. And I'm going to just sort of take it to someone who might have thought of themselves as ordinary as a starting point today in terms of the natural arising bodhicitta and bodhisattva. So this is a story about the Reverend Tanimoto. I've been thinking about the war-torn areas, and the Reverend Tanimoto was someone who survived the atom bomb at Hiroshima. And so after he emerged from a shock or concussion, I'm going to read this report. Mr. Tanimoto greeted the priest and then looked around for other friends. He saw Mrs. Matsumoto, wife of the director of the Methodist school, and asked her if she was thirsty. She was, so he went to one of the pools in the rock gardens and got water for her in his basin. Then he tried to get back to his church. He went by the way the priests had taken as they escaped, but he didn't get far. The fire along the streets was so fierce that he had to turn back. He walked to the riverbank and began to look for a boat in which he might carry some of the most severely injured across the river and away from the spreading fire. Soon he found a good-sized pleasure punt drawn up on the bank, but in and around it was an awful tableau, 5 dead men, nearly naked, badly burned, who must have expired more or less all at once, for they were in attitudes which suggested they had been working together to push the boat down into the river. Mr. Tanimoto lifted them away from the boat, and as he did, he experienced such horror at disturbing the dead, preventing them, he momentarily felt, from launching their craft and going on their ghostly way. He said out loud, "Please forgive me for taking this boat. I must use it for others who are alive." The punt was heavy, but he managed to slide it into the water. There were no oars, and all he could find for propulsion was a thick bamboo pole. He worked the boat upstream to the most crowded part of the park and began to ferry the wounded. He could pack 10 or 12 into the boat for each crossing, but as the river was too deep in the center to pole his way across, he had to paddle with the bamboo, and consequently each trip took a very long time. He worked for several hours that way, and then for many days, and then spent the rest of his life getting medical services for those affected by the bomb and radiation, and becoming an activist in eliminating the bomb from use throughout the world. And what's significant about this story is he probably would have considered himself a fairly ordinary person, but in the moment of a crisis, his gaze went from his own suffering, which must have been considerable, his own shock, which must have been horrific. He certainly experienced radiation poisoning, and his gaze went to the suffering around him. And seeing all of these beings suffering just like him, he made their need and their suffering the same or greater than his own. And as we begin to train in the Bodhisattva way, that's what we're doing. We're learning how to shift our gaze from our own self-referencing bubble, our own mediation of the world in terms of our own experience, our own need, our own suffering and joy, to the presence of mind to be able to conceptualize that just like me, all the beings I see are also suffering. How can I assuage their suffering? So, as we're starting this training, one of the things we were emphasizing last week is that the philosophical view in the Buddhist perspective is that of original blessing, that we all have the seed of this great realization within, and it's a matter of how do we create for ourselves the conditions for that seed to grow, and how do we essentially exercise and help mature our heart-mind in a steady way so that there is a natural progression from where we are to, let's say, the extraordinary capacity of Reverend Matsumoto, and eventually to the capacity of the great heart minds that we think of, such as Lord Jigten Sumgon or Martin Luther King. And so it's perhaps one of our first tasks to start to begin to have confidence that this philosophical root could be true. And some of the examples that were given about the nature, all the examples come from the natural world, but in terms of our Buddha nature, is the sense that we all have a mind, and the essence of that mind is this clarity and awareness, and the flavor of that clarity and awareness is of loving kindness. And that our mind, because it is a mind possessing awareness, is no different from the awareness of the Dalai Lama, is no different from the awareness of Martin Luther King. And it said it's like thinking about a diamond. So if I took a granite rock, no matter how much compression I put a granite rock under, it would never turn into a diamond. But because we have mind, it's like coal. And when we put it under great stress and compression, the diamond is naturally there. There's nothing that has to be done to make the coal other than what the coal is. The coal has the potential of the diamond, so the compression allows the diamond to emerge. One of the other examples is like milk. That if we churn milk, because it has the nature that it has, it turns into butter. It doesn't have to be different than what it is. So this is how we're starting. We don't have to be different than who we are. We don't have to change into a better person who is more like Martin Luther King, more like Mother Teresa. We already have that nature. But like a tiny seed, we have to nurture that seed and create the conditions for it to grow. So this wonderful text that we're studying and the wonderful meditation trainings that go with texts like these are the ways that we nurture and allow this extraordinary quality to grow within ourselves. So, as I was saying, Bodhicitta has 3 classifications. There's no word in English that quite captures it. But one quality is loving kindness, which is the quality of genuinely wanting the best for someone without thinking of someone else. Compassion, wanting someone to be free of suffering. And an unconditional, non-referential, absolute quality that is like space, so that we're not directing in the absolute level of bodhicitta, we're not directing towards an individual, but we're in the beingness quality of bodhicitta that is just naturally expressing without a sense of giver and receiver and activity. But the training that we're engaging in and that we started last week starts with fairly distinct stages. And the first stage is just identifying some way to connect to that feeling of unconditional love. And Lord Jigten Sumgon's advice is compassion is fairly available to human beings. If you show people a child suffering, there's a natural arising of compassion. But loving kindness is a little bit more difficult to give rise to begin with. And so he emphasized the loving kindness aspect. So in looking for a way to connect to loving kindness, I invited you to look at all of your experiences in life and call to the present a memory of a time when you received unconditional love, or in a very simple way, like seeing a toddler or seeing a puppy or kitten, had the experience of your own heart momentarily arising in this unconditional love, that wonderful greeting that we receive and offer when we come home to a a puppy that's missed us, or see an innocent child, that complete undefended openness that is marked by a quality of joy and just delighting in everything beneficial for that being that we're greeting. The second stage was connecting to the felt sense. So we have the memory and we have the felt sense. And so the training exercise actually begins not with the memory, but with the felt sense. So the memory can be our springboard, but what we're focusing on is what our mind feels like and what our body feels like with that completely undefended, warm heart. And for some folks, it may be that the easiest way to access this is lying out in the sun, walking by the ocean, taking a walk in the woods. And it may be just a physical sensation that we were experimenting with just by opening your chest and smiling. So there are many, many ways to access this first felt experience. So I'd like to begin this morning there, each in your own way, experimenting with, not feeling like you have to find the experience that will always work for you, that will always be a reliable springboard, but testing out a springboard for today, then connecting with the felt sense, and to the best of your ability this morning, relaxing there. Relaxing and bringing it to mind over and over and over again. So let's start there, and let's take 5 minutes to connect to that felt sense and then relax into that felt sense. So just relaxing your body, listening to your body, rolling your shoulders back, or you can do a movement like this, just opening your chest, smiling. You can put your right hand on your right knee and your left hand in your lap, the traditional posture that you often see the Buddha in. Connecting to some springboard and the felt sense. So one thing we can notice when we go in to discover that felt sense, and when we turn our attention inside, perhaps to the heart area of our body, that sense of openness that we feel physically as well as mentally, we get a sense of what I mean in terms of internal versus shifting to external. So we're looking at, how do I feel? And often we're not aware of anything other than this filtering of how I feel about this moment in my life, observing the outside world. So this is one thing we notice of the first part of just, yes, there is an interiority to how I experience the world most of the time. And when I try and rest specifically on something ephemeral like a feeling, it's very elusive. And so I actually have to begin to train my mind not only to access the feeling, but how to relax into the feeling, and then how to remain in that relaxed spaciousness of heart-mind. And so these are all normal experiences when we're working with meditation. And I think it's a special moment in our lives, like that verse I quoted when we went to the Bodhisattva's way of life. A flash of lightning rends the night. When we first notice that there is a little spark or a little spring inside us that actually is the bodhicitta, that it's not necessarily dependent on the memory. We may have started with some sort of memory or experience, but there is something there that's truly a part of us. And so that may take a while of familiarity and relaxation and ease in staying with the heart-mind until we see that there is this spring that is us. But eventually that will come, that recognition. And that flash of lightning is a wonderful connection to spiritual joy. And what's significant about spiritual joy is it's not dependent on anything outside us at all. It's not dependent on our senses. It's not dependent on who is in the room with us. It's something that is truly a part of our nature. And when we feel that spark, that is a way of knowing that, yes, I'm coal with a diamond inside. I'm not granite. Or I'm milk with the potential of butter, not Coca-Cola. So this flash of lightning is your internal guide and proof that, yes, this philosophical view of original blessing is not false, it is true. It is a seed and it can sprout. So the metaphor I'm going to be using this morning actually is seeds and sprouts, because it's definitely the time of year here in Maine. And I want you to just notice the sprouting of that seed lifting its head and opening, but even the upper picture that has the just fragile little sprouts. You wonder, are all of them going to survive? And they're so tender, and how can I take care of them? This is the time of year when we're just thinking, maybe could we even plant a seed? And so the stages of developing bodhicitta are an awareness of how fragile that flash of lightning is in our heart-mind, and how we need to attend to it and care for it and strengthen it. So in the same way that these seedlings that we see are so fragile, without their care, they would just wither. Similarly, if we look at the larger picture with the seed beginning to lift its head and then opens its leaves, we would never think that there's something wrong with any of the stages, right? We would just say, oh, look, there's stages. These are the natural stages. This is the first stage, and it's just what it should be. This is the second stage. It's just what it should be. And so we want to, as we look within, be appreciative of the stage that we're in and rejoice in the beauty of that particular stage, and not wish it to be anything different, not judge it for being just where it is, but just rejoice that this is my seed that I'm learning how to nurture and care for. And that is so important, because we're so often comparing ourselves or setting up expectations. And the expectations are not based in necessarily observation of the stages, but just some imaginary expectation. I'm not Reverend Matimoto, so I should give up. I'm not Martin Luther King, so I should give up, as opposed to, I have found a fragile seedling and I can learn how to nurture that seedling, and one day it will grow into an extraordinary capacity. So the second stage really is very important in terms of strengthening. At this time of year, we haven't even planted the seeds, and it's a long time before they sprout. But if you're looking at those fragile little seeds, we know that we can't put them outside yet. You know, one change in the weather and they would all die, right? We know we have to water them every couple of days, or they dry out and they die. So we know that we have to care for them, and we have to care for the conditions that they're in. And this is true for us as well. So in Lord Jigten Sumgon's expression of this teaching, he says, we have to connect with that felt experience for quite a long time. We have to not only recognize it, not only become at home with it, but we have to nurture it like that tiny little seedling until it grows stronger and stronger and stronger. So if we look at the seedling on the far left and the difference between the fragile little hair-like seedlings in the corner, we can see the difference. This is a passage of time and a cultivation of conditions. And so this is what our daily practice does for us, and the inclusion in our daily practice of a Bodhicitta training. So this training is how to strengthen the capacity of your mind to stay where you ask it to stay, to become less and less distracted, but also to strengthen a particular quality, a particular feeling, until we can feel it from our head to our toes, until we can feel that warmth of opening in every cell of our body, until it is a home for us, that every time we sit down in meditation, we can say, oh yes, I'm not searching, I'm not struggling, I recognize this feeling. This feeling is even coming more and more spontaneously to me when I sit, and I can rest there. And the importance of this is because we're cultivating this feeling so that we begin to develop the strength that we can extend it to others. And we need to be able to see what happens when we try to extend it to each other, to each other and to others. And what is the range that we have at this moment in time? So it's good just to rest in that feeling, to notice how it feels in our body, to notice what it's like to be open without being afraid. We're sitting here on our cushions. We have the conditions that we can meditate. We're in a safe place at this moment, not even necessarily all moments of our lives, but this moment. What does fully open heart-mind feel like in our mind and in our bodies? So let's take a minute just to explore, what does fearlessness feel like? What does this undefended aspect feel like? Because most of our lives were very, very defended. So sitting, opening our chest, that smile that reminds us of our warm hearts, allowing that warm heart to pervade, and really assessing where you are as a seedling. Are you feeling very fragile? Is it important to you to feel as though you're receiving that unconditional love and really appreciating that stage, that new fragile stage, and allowing that stage to be absolutely perfect in this moment for you? For someone else, it might be the beginning of familiarity. So how strong can you feel this in your mind and in your body? Sometimes after a long winter, we want to feel the sun in our bones. Can we feel this in our bones? Can we feel the fullness? Can we feel it as though we're a cup about to overflow? Not overflowing yet, but just that fullness on the brim, ready to overflow. And appreciate that stage, just for what it is. And the significance of both stages in this training as part of a progression, and that both stages are essential and can't be neglected any more than water or sunlight can be neglected for the seedling. And for someone else, it might be, I don't have to manufacture this anymore. It is present in my cells and in my bones. It is a spring that's filling up the quality of about to overflow. So we're looking at these seedlings inside, this bodhicitta as a seedling. And at a certain point of that quality of feeling full and about to overflow, we're essentially making the decision, can I move these little seedlings outside now? Can they withstand weather? And that's when we take our perspective from interiority, our self-referencing and understanding of bodhicitta, and allow it to overflow. And his traditional instructions are to allow it to overflow like a spiral. And the instructions are not specific. You can imagine it like your family table, or your neighborhood, or your chosen family. You can even make it more neutral. If you're, for instance, in a waiting room in an airport or a hospital, however it arises in your imagination, to just starting to extend it even to one other person. Allow it to overflow and then notice what happens in your heart-mind. Coming from this undefended place, this fullness might be so terrifying that you slam the door shut like a steel door on a, I'm imagining the vaults. And you go, oh, look at that. Or you might find like you're opening the door a millimeter at a time. I'm afraid to open the door maybe if I go really, really slowly. Look what happens in your heart mind the second you qualify what opening is. How it shifts from that brim ready to naturally overflow into a self-referencing condition. And this is absolutely normal. That's bringing us right into our habitual response of being defended. And the instruction is right here, right at that moment that we recognize that we're qualifying, go back to resting in the connecting to the feeling, the felt sense, and the strengthening. Essentially, we're saying, oh, it's too cold. I can't put this seedling outside quite yet. So let's look at how our body tenses. We could read it just in a physical way, or how our mind tenses. But, I'm not sure, I can't. Okay, back to I'm receiving, I'm strengthening, I'm resting in a relaxed way. I'm allowing that seedling to become stronger and stronger. So let's take some time to just go back and forth at your own rate of speed, appreciating that your seedling knows exactly what it needs in this moment. And that really the goal is noticing the second your mind shifts from undefended to defended. So let's keep exploring in the same way we explored how to touch that bodhicitta feeling. We want to touch defended and undefended. So if we were overflowing, even to one person, let's think of one person who we think of as a very close friend. Let's acknowledge that family members can be complex, even our beloveds can be complex relationships. Let's overflow to a close friend. And just notice, is there a shift in your body? Is there a contraction anywhere? Is there a tensing? Are you holding this mental state with delight and curiosity? Or are you starting to question, doubt, but, I can't? Just noticing our vulnerable human nature as we're overflowing, even with a close friend. going back and forth, learning to see the subtlety of the qualification, either physically or mentally, and strengthening. And it may be that today you're spending the whole morning on just strengthening. And that's absolutely wonderful. And for those who are exploring what it's like to be open and undefended with a close friend, slide over in your imagination to a total stranger. Maybe someone you passed on the street, passed in the supermarket, you didn't know and had no judgments about particularly. And just shift back and forth between the friend and the person that you've not met. And experiment, what is it like to hold that undefended fullness of loving kindness to a total stranger? For some people it may be easier, and for some people it may be more difficult. But the instructions remain the same. Our attention is, can we maintain the fullness? And if there's any shift, even closing the door a tiny bit, we go back to strengthening, becoming familiar. Our knowing so complete that it brims over. So let's come back from the meditation and really look at what we're learning. This spiral, for instance, of the overflowing is such a beautiful instruction because it is so undefined. We can begin in any way we wish, and every single meditation it's different. You may see different figures in your imagination, some from work, some from family. You may see different parts of the world in your meditation, but the sense of the meditation is to allow that spiral to continue. You may be working with your neighborhood and expand it to your state and your country, and that however it is arising is just right, and eventually you can encompass this world. And I love the Tibetans' expression of infinite. You can extend it to this world, and then this solar system, and then this galaxy, and then the multiverse, which they express as the 3,000 world systems. So there's no end to the depth and reach of this practice, and the instructions stay the same. What becomes interesting is the nuances that you begin to see in your own strength of holding loving compassion, in your ability to keep strengthening it, and your ability to observe the many different areas of your life experiences. So let's say, even if we were working with our neighborhoods, eventually we would have to encounter the areas of our neighborhood where the people that we have difficulty live. It may be, eventually that you get to the irritable neighbors, or the neighbors who play loud music. And in terms of the world, eventually you get to your state politicians. Eventually we get to not only our government, but all the different polarized factions of our country. Eventually we get to the war-torn areas of our globe, both the perpetrators and victims. At each level, if there is not a fullness in the perfection that we've been able to experience of strength, then we go back and sit again with all of our intelligence and all of our body wisdom. And I think it's why this meditation is so powerful, because it's always both accessible and appropriate. But let's really look at how we can do this meditation safely, and essentially, how do we judge? Can we put the seedling outside? Is it going to be frozen? Is the temperature going to drop down to 20 degrees? So the first inclination is the shift in your body, the feeling of being unsafe. We can, and I certainly experience sometimes, as a door slamming shut. So we can certainly tell that there are areas of our experience that we're not ready to work with right now. And just as we would not look at that picture of the seedlings and say, grow faster, you're not a good meditator, you're not a good seedling. If a seedling isn't ready, we don't tell ourselves that either. We're saying to ourselves, how wonderful that you're learning the nuances, and how wonderful that you're learning what your boundaries are. And it's appropriate to keep those boundaries until there is a natural overflowing. And there are many, many practices, particularly the ones we find in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Most particularly the patience chapter is famous for looking at all of the great difficulties we have with different kinds of feelings that arise in regard to different kinds of sentient beings. So each time we're going back slowly inside, strengthening. When we see the door slamming shut, we acknowledge that and say, oh, I see I need to really look at this area and gain some skills about this area, and slowly work on my response to this area. All the time looking at, am I judging myself? Am I being aggressive to my own Buddha nature, my own little fragile seedling, by this judgment and criticism? And what can I do to water this little seedling with the waters of self-compassion until it's ready to take on more and more difficult situations? What's also interesting about this practice is it's not rational or logical. We're not trying to fix a situation. We're not trying to find a solution. We're not trying to prove that we were right. We're not calling our team to say, yes, you were right, they were wrong. We're seeing, when does my heart want to close, and when does my heart want to open? And in that seeing, we're asking ourselves, what does it feel like when my heart is open and undefended? And what does it feel like when my heart is closed and contracted? What does it feel like in my own experience when I'm harsh and judging towards my little seedling? Essentially, we're teaching ourselves that even mentally, opening and closing, the closing does not feel as good as the opening. And that helps show us that we want to strengthen the opening, that it feels better, it feels wonderful, and that we have a choice between the mind that's closing and judging and criticizing, and the mind that's softening and opening and becoming more spacious. We're, in a way, like the kindest teacher or parent to ourselves, saying, this actually feels better. I could choose to live here. I could choose to excel in this instead of excelling in closing, excelling in harsh, judgmental self-referencing. And I can't underestimate this. We need to know what it feels like so that we choose to continue with the training, because we start to appreciate, not only is it rare like a flash of lightning, it's rare that we're not familiar with this feeling, and we have to keep remembering that this feeling is also within us and is also a choice where we can relax and dwell. And so we choose the boundaries that are appropriate for us with the aspiration that over time, not only the aspiration, that the confidence that with the good conditions over time, there'll be a continuous steady growth. Let me see if I can Okay, there's the slide. So this steady growth as we go through the person-to-person individual until it becomes like the gigantic tree with roots that are so strong that no outer circumstance can knock it over or prevent its continued growth. And we have confidence that the natural progression is from the seedling to the tree, no matter how long it takes. And we begin to choose our Buddha nature as opposed to our confused, grumpy, critical, judgmental thoughts. We learn more and more how to choose the bodhicitta state of mind, cultivating it and strengthening it. Now, what's also true is it doesn't happen in isolation. So it is true that everyone with mind has the potential, and we could work with any being. There's a story in the time of the Buddha of Angulimala, who was a murderous thief. He was like the worst warlord, and he was so fearsome. He wore a necklace of all the fingers and hands that he had cut off his enemies. And one day the Buddha was walking by him, and Angulimala wanted to attack him, and Buddha said, "Surely you can attack me, you just have to catch me." And Angulimala couldn't make any progression closer towards the Buddha. And so he had the good sense to see that here was a teacher who could release him from his enraged, confused mind. And so Angulimala was able to work with the different meditation practices, which would have included the metta meditation, very similar to this, and over time became a revered monk full of a warm-hearted kindness. But he also changed his behavior. So we're not working with this practice in isolation from our actions. And when this was taught at the time of the Buddha, and just as we're seeing in the progression of the chapters of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, this investigation of our heart-mind opening and closing begins to elicit a fearless transparency as well as a fearless loving kindness. We start to see that part of the closing has to do with some of our activities and behaviors. And so this training goes along with an ethical base. And the simple way the Buddha taught it originally mentions very simple relationship to morality, just in terms of the practicality of honesty, to being open to learning, and to being corrected. So being able to open our hearts allows us to see what's going on in our lives, in the present moment and in the past, with more clarity and with a softness so that we're open to hearing and being corrected, that we become more and more gentle, more and more soft in our own actions, more humble, more contented. And we see how these connect to an inner lightness, a sense of calm and mindfulness in response to provocation. So we're more and more sensitive to our heart-mind opening and closing when we're listening to the world around us, when we're being corrected, and when we're being provoked. So our behaviors, our outer behaviors, are matching our inner behavior and our valuing of bodhicitta. Can we listen with bodhicitta? Can we act with bodhicitta? As we move off the cushion, can we feel our heart-mind opening and closing situationally? So let's take this into meditation, wherever we are as seedlings today as being just right, whether it's strengthening, filling to the brim, or overflowing. What are we learning about the heart-mind of bodhicitta? Remembering to listen to our body as well as our mind, rolling our shoulders back so that our chest opens, and smiling. And whatever we're encountering in the meditation, whenever there's a closing or a waning of bodhicitta, stopping right there, strengthening and beginning again. So I'd like to close today with a depiction of the vastness. One of the most remarkable things in the Asian tradition, going from country to country, is Kuan Yin, she who hears the cries of the world, that being who has the capacity to see every sentient being and hear their cries. And what I love about the Japanese and Tibetan depictions is that she has 11 heads so she can see in all directions, and 1,000 arms so that when we call out, one of her hands holds what we need at that moment. She changes from male to female in different countries, and universally is the fruition of the boundless bodhicitta, the loving kindness and compassion with no discernment that one is worthy, another not worthy, just completely open. So that would be the tree we're growing towards. And then this poem reflects where we are, many of us, certainly I am in this moment. It's a poem by Jane Hirschfeld that was written in the beginning of the epidemic. Today when I could do nothing. Today when I could do nothing, I saved an ant. It must have come in with the morning paper still being delivered to those who shelter in place. A morning paper is still an essential service. I am not an essential service. I have coffee, books, time, a garden, silence enough to fill cisterns. It must have first walked the morning paper as if loosened ink taking the shape of an ant, then across the laptop computer, warm, then to the back of a cushion, small black ant alone crossing a navy cushion, moving steadily because that is what it could do. Set outside in the sun, it could not have found again its nest. What then did I save? It did not move as if it was frightened even while walking my hand, which moved it through swiftness and air. Ant alone without companions, whose ant heart I could not fathom. How is your life, I wanted to ask. I lifted it, took it outside. The first day when I could do nothing, contribute nothing, beyond staying distant from my own kind, I did this. One of the first Bodhisattva trainings living in the Tibetan community is seeing everyone rescue insects. Walking down the road to get tea in the morning, to get bread for the family in the morning, taking a daily walk in the afternoon. Young to old, you see people bending over, rescuing a caterpillar and moving it off the road. Rescuing an ant, moving it off the road, extending bodhicitta and saving a life in the tiniest way, and rejoicing in that activity, that collective mentality of a culture, that a natural act that you would teach the smallest child is when you're walking, look down and see if you can rescue a life. So that's a good place to close with a rejoicing of what we can do as our fragile little seedlings. And so now the dedication prayers. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? There's a bit of an echo in here. Is there an echo at home? Okay. Thanks for bearing with us. First hybrid session.
Now you're muted, Ali. While we're waiting, I'm sure this is prayer, one of the dedications. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.
That's beautiful. Can you hear me now?
Mm.
Success. Okay. All right. So that was the Bodhicitta prayer she just covered. Yeah. So I will close the practice with a few announcements. So you can first hyper session. Okay. On Wednesday, March 30th from 7 to 8, there's a guided shamatha and guided compassion practice with Sue. And on Wednesday, April 16th, the first of our two-part spring meditation retreat series begins with a Dharma talk, Coming to Peace with Who We Are by Khenmo. More program information and registration information can be found on our website. Okay.
I think you said April 16th, and I think we are starting April 6th.
April 6th. Yes. Thank you, Khenmo. All right. You can keep abreast of our upcoming practices and events by signing up for our newsletter using the link posted in the chat. There's a link to our calendar of events there too. In addition, you'll find links to our membership and donation pages. If generosity is a part of your spiritual practice, you may wish to support Dharma Refuge either as a member or through one-time giving. We're grateful for your presence and support and patience, I might add. Closing prayer. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the miseries of the world. You're welcome to join us in our virtual tea room and study and practice discussion with Sue and Khenmo. We'll keep our Zoom room open until then. Thanks.
Good job, Ellie.
So how do we do the Zoom room?
So people on Zoom, if people on Zoom have a question, you can unmute yourself. Can you hear me? People on Zoom? Yeah. If you have a question on Zoom, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand. And if anyone here has a question. Khenmo, thank you so much. The teaching was beautiful. I particularly appreciate the way you make it so experiential and have us find those edges in the practice. So thank you for that. Eric. Oh, it's on. Yeah.
Good morning, Khenmo. Thank you very much for your teachings this morning. I experienced a strange sensation when I was moving from somebody that I'm close to with my bodhicitta overflowing, and then moving to somebody that I didn't know that was a stranger. And my first thought was that they would think, what do I want? What am I getting out of this by trying to be altruistic to them? So I was curious as to your thoughts on that.
What's interesting is all the different ways our minds qualify being open. So you could say, oh, that's a quality of doubt, you know, that my mind is registering a way for it to close down a little bit. And it's just about noticing. and noticing in more and more subtle ways. So as we go deeper and deeper into the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, it gets more and more clear that it is us creating a boundary between those we know and think of as loved and those we don't know, and those we classify as difficult or enemies. They are all beings just like me who have the same desire for happiness and to be free from suffering.
Thank you.
Yeah, Catherine?
Hi, and thank you so much. That was exactly what I needed today. I suspect everyone would say the same thing. First, I'm so pleased. I have a new practice now, and it's called saving ants. And but that, and it is. I mean, it's like that just brings it down to the very essence of being bodhisattvas. You know, if we save an ant, we save everybody. And somehow that light bulb went off in a way. I mean, I often save ants and all kinds of critters running around in my house, but I've never really thought of it that way. So, you know, you could write a whole book with a title called Saving Ants. It would be awesome. Or maybe a children's book. Practice. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's wonderful.
One of the things that it's Zigor Control Sangha does in Maine is they come over once a year. Actually, the Khandro Rinpoche Sangha does too, and they buy a shipment of lobster. We used to do that at Gampo Abbey, the last lobsters of the season, and then set them free. So you can progress, you know, to whole boatloads.
Khenmo, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you mentioned Zigor Khanto Rinpoche, and I was reading an article this morning in Tricycle where he talks about Sewa, and he's famous for his teachings on Sewa. And he's got a book, I think with that title, it's Training in Tenderness. And the way, I haven't heard anyone else talk about Sewa the way Zigor Khanto Rinpoche does. And it feels to me like he's really just describing this soft spot of bodhicitta, the relative, and then the absolute and that potential. And I wondered if you had anything to say about that, if you've, I think it's the same thing, but he's using this word sewa. It certainly experientially feels that way.
Yes, I haven't read this particular article or his book, but I think we're all looking at ways to communicate that this is the intrinsic nature of every being with mind, and to find a way to have confidence and then strengthen. And each of the Tibetan words has like a world of meaning, a whole aspect that's quite specific. And so it's wonderful to see the descriptions of all the different words, because we get descriptions of all the different nuances of this word that we don't even have a translation for in one definition.
Yeah, he talks about it as the warm heart, the warmth of our heart, and the tenderness. I will put that article in the resources section for the Bodhicitta chapter 1 for those who are in this study. So I see Jane's hand is up.
Yes, Khenmo, thank you for your wonderful teaching this morning. I was struck by the ultimate similarities in the direction you're taking us in with Thich Nhat Hanh's work. And I've recently become aware of Kyra Jualingo and her book that was just recently published, We Were Made for These Times. I don't know if you're familiar with her or with that book at all. Well, she's a Black Buddhist teacher who was a nun with Thich Nhat Hanh for 15 years. And then I think for the last 15 or 20 years, she decided, after much discernment, to leave his community to go out and be a teacher. And this book, as you're teaching today, is just a stunning piece of work because it focuses on our need to come from that warm and loving place in order to be the best that we can be in addressing all of the challenges in the modern world. And while her practices are a little bit different, they're not very much different. And from some exposure I had to Thich Nhat Hanh, it is all about creating that kindness and gentleness and warmth in our own heart, first for ourselves, and then gradually being able to reach out to others. So it's fascinating to me how the different lineages coming down from Buddhism, many, at least the ones I've been exposed to, ultimately are coming to a very simple and centered place in what we need to do.
I think that's quite accurate. So when we read the Metta Sutra, which it would be the earliest teaching on altruism and loving kindness, we see the hints of this when we read the Four Immeasurables. And the particular nuance that Lord Jigten Sumgon has that I haven't seen in other places is that stopping and starting over and over again, noticing the qualitative difference and beginning again. And also, and maybe the Thich Nhat Hanh recommends smiling, but I first came across the smiling. So you're right. It all goes back to the Buddha. We all go back to the Buddha. And because it's the essence of our nature, enlightenment is that complete realization of wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and bodhicitta, or ultimate bodhicitta. So yes, it's similar in almost any tradition you might find.
Well, what's been interesting for me, I mean, I've been sitting for almost 50 years now. I started out in traditional Zen, had some direct exposure with Thich Nhat Hanh over 2 or 3 different periods of time, and then have been involved with Tibetan Buddhism for the last 8 years. And I'm finding at my age, I am wanting, there's all of these advanced teachings and advanced learnings, and I'm finding what's helpful for me at this point in my life, in my mid-70s, is to just go back to the simple, the smile. And it was from Thich Nhat Hanh that I originally, and have for years, been using that. And as someone with a strong background in physiological psych, I know that just changing the muscles change what happens in your brain. And so coming back to these very simple practices and letting go of some of the complexity has been really speaking to my heart in these challenging times.
Well, when we think of the capacity of the Buddha being the 3,000 world systems, I realize I can do this all the time and never find the limit of what it's teaching me. So it's one of those practices that is my constant companion.
Khenmo,
Mm-hmm.
I wondered, since Jane brought in Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'm thinking about the upcoming retreats and the talks that you're going to offer at Dharma Refuge, and also Jane bringing in this coming back to simplicity, I wondered if you might share just a little bit about that curriculum, just a very high level, to give people a sense of that, because I know that His Holiness Chetsen Rinpoche, who built that meditation curriculum, worked with the commentary from Thich Nhat Hanh on the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutra. So it really is that coming back to the basics, I think, and revisiting meditation if you're experienced.
Yes, I think His Holiness Drikung Rinpoche is an extraordinary leader for this particular era. And he is very interested in seeing what unites all of Buddhism. And he particularly became interested in Sharavasti, the site where Buddha taught most of the sutras, and looked to see what could we find that was the closest to what the Buddha actually practiced. You know, what is the root that's common to all of Buddhism? And so he found the sutra on the mindfulness of breathing. And I remember reading in Thich Nhat Hanh's biography, Thich Nhat Hanh talking about when he found that same sutra. It was not commonly practiced in the Vietnamese Zen tradition when he was training. And he thought, oh, this is what I want to teach my students. Here is the sutra. So when we teach anything, we don't alter the medicine. So we know when we see the sutra root that that is a medicine that has a profound effect on people's minds. So he found the root, and then His Holiness Drikung Rinpoche was studying all the different compendiums, and it wasn't even in the Tibetan compendium, it was in the Chinese compendium of the collection of the Buddha's teachings. So he had the same reaction. I'm looking at the 21st century. I'm seeing that the practices that are our normal curriculum are meant for a 3-year retreat. Does this actually fit the lives of the international Sangha now that there's been the great diaspora? And so he created a curriculum based on mindfulness of breathing, going back to this extraordinary simplified root that has all of the complexity, and is teaching it with a commentary from all the different eras of Buddhism. And because Thich Nhat Hanh loved it so much, he was using Thich Nhat Hanh's commentary for the Mahayana perspective on how to work with the simple instructions on meditation. So we have the very earliest instructions of the Buddha with all of its practicality that he taught in every town and village to all different kinds of minds. Then Thich Nhat Hanh and the Mahayana emphasis on Bodhicitta, and then the later era of Tibetan Buddhism with the emphasis on Buddha nature and we would say Dzogchen or Mahamudra. So it's a framework that's extraordinarily simple, but holds vastness of potential in the same way this meditation does.
Thank you, Khenmo.
Okay, last opportunity. Oh, I see Christy.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciated the whole breakdown. You know, it's so often we hear about this unconditional compassion, and I think that's what has brought all of us to this practice. And it is, I mean, I'll admit it's a goal of mine to achieve that. And I've struggled with finding the way to that. So the steps, and I find the steps so helpful, but I also get very distracted by that goal a lot. Like it distracts me from my practice. And I was just wondering if you have any other tips, or is it just continuing to practice to not let that distract me?
I think, you know, that's a really important thing to bring up. I mean, essentially, the whole state of samsara is constantly being distracted, whether it's being distracted by a goal, being distracted by, you know, some extreme emotion arising, being distracted by lunch. And so to understand, oh, this is how human minds work. And again, not criticizing, judging, or in any way extending any kind of aggression towards yourself, saying, oh, distraction. I want to learn about distraction now. So just in the same way we're learning about bodhicitta, all of the teachings on meditation have skillful means to work with the different kinds of distraction, the state of distraction. So we're building a sort of a full toolbox that addresses the human condition, both in reaching its potential and what is preventing us from reaching the potential.
Thank you.
And the other thing I think that's important about that is to look culturally. The Tibetan system of teaching is to present the fruition first. It's both the view and the greatest potential, because in their culture, there's a sense of being totally inspired and wanting to jump in. And our culture more often hears the potential and says, but I'm not that, and I can't do it, so I should give up. So really seeing that we hear through a cultural lens as well, and noticing that. And that's why we want to understand the framework, the purpose of the framework in terms of how teachings are structured, and understand how we fit in and learn in that framework. Any last questions?
I might pipe in here with just one request and announcement, and that is we're considering having the Dharma Center open for the retreats with Khenmo, not for the Wednesday nights, but for the all-day Saturday retreats. And in order to do that, we would need to have a little more help. So if there's anyone who could volunteer to be a greeter at the door, that would be great. And if there's anyone who could volunteer to help with AV, which is getting our TV set up, and we've got instructions for how to do all that, but we want to start to train some folks in the Sangha. So this is under consideration, and if you are interested in attending in person and you could help, if you could email me or email Allie, and it's sue@dharmarefuge.com and Allie, A-L-I, @dharmarefuge.com. We'd be grateful for your help. We're not fully reopened for practices yet. We've got our toe in, and we're trying to work out exactly how this all works with TVs and cameras and audio. So we appreciate you all joining today for this and being patient as we work our way through the process. And we hope to be able to continue to do this. And so you've been a blessing, Khenmo, on our first time back in the Dharma Center in 2.5 years. Thank you so much.
Good to see you all. I'm so glad we were able to do both parts of this meditation, and I hope you will grow to love it as much as I do. So take care, and hopefully see many of you in April.
Thank you, Khenmo. And I also wanted to remind folks that you can make donations to Vajra Dakini in honor of Khenmo's generous teachings today. And I think Catherine is putting a link in for that. Khenmo, just like all monastics, are supported entirely through the generosity of the Sangha. And that's how it is that the teachings are able to continue to flow. So we wanted to mention that before you all leave. So thank you very much.
So bye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye, Khenmo. Thank you so much. All right.
Catherine, thank you.
Sure, it went really well. It was a little busy in the chat, but it was great, and it went really well, and it was an amazing. It was, I don't know, it's like sometimes when you attend these, it's like opening the chapter of a book, and you always open to the right chapter. So I just trust that you come here and listen, and oh, that's what I needed to hear this week. It never fails. So, but Kenmo's teachings today were just particularly, I don't know, maybe I'm just more open right now, but really wonderful. They were just
I
wonderful.
wanted to ask the Sangha that's still present if they would keep Catherine's husband, Bob Rubenthal, in their prayers. He's going through a health challenge right now, and he could use our loving care beamed over to their house right this very moment, right, Catherine?
Yes, right this very moment. Yes, very much so. Pray for sleep for him. So, yeah, it would be wonderful. Thank you, Sue. Thank you. So I will, let me stop recording. We don't need all this.
And can you save the transcript and email it to me, Catherine?
Yeah, I will.